Hi, I'm Dusty, and welcome to Not My Lab. Today I wanted to do a video on free will. I'm thinking about free will for a while, and I think that it's an interesting topic, and one that, frankly, I kind of need a little bit of help with right now. Kind of feel like I've hit a stagnation point in my ability to think about this, and I think that I just want to kind of get my understanding out there and then see what other people have to think about it. I don't think I've heard formally or informally anyone really think about free will in the way I'm going to try to describe it, the way that I think about it. At the end of the video, it'll get kind of confusing probably because it seems like you're kind of trying to believe two contradictory things at the same time, or at least think about the possibility of two contradictory things at the same time, and how do you then live your life, thinking two contradictory things. Like, what is your actual belief at that point? I don't know. Anyway, to get into it here, what is free will and why should we care? Free will, I think, is pretty well described as the ability to choose. That we're just describing it in terms of another term. But the ability to choose in some action over another, to influence a course of events. So to feel like, if you go into a situation that you have the free will or the choice to influence, how that scenario plays out, what's going to happen, like whether you can actually influence things or whether they just kind of happen. The feeling that someone chooses to do something seems necessary to holding them morally accountable. It isn't just what someone does, murder versus self-defense, but why they do it, what information they had and how they interpreted it, misdirection, deception, manipulation, psychosis. That also at least somewhat matters. Rulings of insanity, lack of competence. So free will is important because whether we realize it or not, it plays a big role in how we judge people, how we hold them accountable for things, what knowledge they had, whether they made a good or a bad decision, whether based on the information that they were given. A murder in self-defense is not the same thing as a premeditated murder. A murder in the moment is not the same as a premeditated murder. The sequence of events and the mental state of the person committing the crime is important, and thus then their choice. So this is why we might want to think that free will or understanding it in some way is important, because fundamentally it seems like if we as human beings, as agents, don't have any free will or ability to influence our course of events, then how can we be held accountable or responsible for them in some sense? And you can make the case that, oh well, it doesn't matter what the agency or the choice or the decision making was. It was you do something wrong, you get punished for it. I think that evidence against that is manslaughter, these different things that I explained, just in the common sense way that we actually think and work with these problems. But it is interesting, how much does it matter? How much does the agency or the good or badness of the choice, play into how we dish out justice or punishment or whatever you want to call it? If our actions are predetermined by previous circumstances, way things are and thus have been, etc., then there is no way to avoid our own fates, and there is no true agency or ability for true moral growth. This ties into the idea of a soul, and we're going to, slowly wade into this, how this is supposed to work, or how I think that we think about things, but don't really aren't consciously aware of how we think about things sometimes, as far as free will and moral responsibility. How free will is supposed to work, why it largely doesn't make sense. Okay, so common sense version. We wake up and we can choose to spend our days any way we can imagine. There are infinitely many possible variations of the ways our days can play out, and so we have free will. You ask anyone, or not anyone, but most people on the street if they have free will, the common sense term free will, you say that and they're like, yeah, of course I have free will. It's the idea that you are a subject, an agent in your environment, and you can choose and do things within it of your own volition. Now, when you start to think about this a little bit closer and harder, especially considering some of the laws that we've established or seem to have established, in science and technology, physics, it starts to fall apart. So the retort might be, how limited is our imagination? Is our imagination limitless? Isn't our imagination fed by previous occurrence? And so things are simply playing out like dominoes, falling down. This comes back to causality. So beyond any type of physical law, it's almost it almost seems like a metaphysical law that every event has a cause, right? That things cause other things. Even if you want to get into quantum mechanics and the randomness and probabilistic issues, even like there's still some cause effect relationship going on with any material interaction in our world that we can observe and be aware of. So the thought that we are somehow separate from these causal laws, that we as human beings and as free agents are separate from that and somehow can break free of that system and just natural way that things work, is confusing. How can that be? How can we explain that scientifically? Can we explain it philosophically? I don't know. I don't know if we can. I don't know if we can explain it necessarily. What I am going to try to do is make a little bit of sense of it, maybe, or at least frame it in such a way that we can maybe get a better, more useful understanding of it. So also, I'd like to, just touch on, I think that this is a good way to explain it. Also, the imagination thing. It's like, even if you imagine that you can do anything that you can imagine, yourself doing. Let's not talk about the fact that you have a body and whatnot. That's limited. But if you can imagine, yourself doing any number of things during the day, isn't that free will? Well, isn't your imagination and the ability for you to comprehend how your days could play out, influencing how your imagination is capable of working? So basically what I'm saying is that, yeah, you might be able to do anything you can imagine, but there are limitations of your imagination, in that you only have access to the models and representations that you've come into contact with in the world. So in this sense, I think that even if you think that you can, will anything that you can imagine into existence, which I think there might be some truth to that, there are limitations of your imagination. You can't just imagine the best invention ever, without having some type of building block, basic understanding of how reality works and what you can reference and work with. So if our will was free, then we could pick up and fly, or spontaneously create anything we comprehended effortlessly and without restriction. So if you think about it this way, if you really think about what the words free will mean, if our will was truly free, it would be similar to a dream, and that anything that we could imagine, ideally our imaginations even would be limitless, we could just spontaneously erupt it into existence and interact with and play with it, and have no real physical limitations or natural limitations of cause and effect even. And that would be what true free will would mean, to not have any limitation, physical limitation, imaginary limitation, anything whatsoever, and to have it just exist without having to actually put any type of time or effort or any of these common sense human terms that we have into it. I think that the only truly satisfactory version of free will, and which is one in which we have an immaterial, non-causal aspect. So clearly, via the last example, we can see that our will isn't free. But can there be a will? Can there be something that is not material, that is non-causal, that is somehow meta above all of these fundamental aspects of our reality, and is our intuitive feeling or even philosophical thinking about the idea of free will, is that a lens or a window into an actual real phenomena that we just cannot quite seem to nail down. So keeping all this in mind, where do I want to go next? So it seems like a big 180 and a left turn, but I actually want to go into what's called the annihilation argument. So the annihilation argument is a discussion on a few different concepts. It's tied into the conception of God, and everything, perfection, and nothingness, and what it really truly means for something to be nothing, or what it means for something to be something, really. What does true nothingness mean? And the thought experiment, the model in the idea is of a bottle. So here's some hand sanitizer. So if we wanted to eliminate annihilate all of the stuff inside of this bottle, what would that mean? So at first it seems like, okay, well, there's hand sanitizer in there, so if we just get rid of all of that, then it would be gone. There would be nothing in the bottle. That's one way to think about it, but we might realize, oh, well, there's still air in the bottle. Oh, well, okay, take the air out. There's no air in the bottle. There's only space in the bottle now. There's the vacuum. There's no material stuff. It's just space. Now, here's where it gets tricky. So you might also think, though, that what about the space? Isn't the space stuff? Because what if the walls of the bottle are together? Wouldn't that be less stuff in some sense, or like less at least than having the space in there? And it's confusing because you want to think and you want to feel that space, a vacuum, is truly empty, that it is devoid of anything, that there's nothing there. But I think that pretty quickly, if we're careful, then we can actually show how that's not true. So philosophers have talked about and interchanged different terminology, but we can think of things that we can interact with and think about in reality as being extended, as being substances, and as having attributes. And I'm going to butcher the usage of these terms, but I'm going to just kind of make them my own. So if we want to think about extension is just places where stuff can be. It's just literally we are extended. Everything that we come in contact with is extended. The material world is extended. Now, what might get confusing is whether or not space is extended. Now, and I think that that's really the crux of this argument. Like, what is space? Is it a substance? Because for something to be a substance, it needs to have some substantial attribute, right? It needs to actually has aboutness, like something about it that we can interact with. And we might think with space that there's no way to interact with it, that we can't, that it is truly the aspect of nothingness. But I think that that's not true, because when we think about the bottle and the walls touching, what is the difference when we have the vacuum? The difference is that it takes time for us to move through it, right? To move through the bottle. If we were really tiny, if we were moving through inside of this bottle and there was nothing in it, if there was only the vacuum, it still takes time, and this is a human term, but it takes time for us to move through it. And so really it's space-time. Space and time are the same thing, and there is space inside of it, but that space in and of itself has, I think, the substantive attribute of needing time to move through it. Now, what does this mean? Well, I'm totally sure of all of it. I think that it's interesting. I'm not sure how much I want to go into divine extension. There's an idea that's been had that space is what's called divine extension. All that really means is that it's a special substance and that it's extended, but it has no other attribute other than extension, and that in the process of something coming into contact with it, it relinquishes this attribute of extension. And that's my own definition. And I haven't even looked up the original conceptions of what that means, but essentially divine extension is a unique form of extension that is substantive, but it isn't. It's a unique substance in that regard, but still a substance nonetheless, because it has the attribute of needing time to pass through it, in my opinion. Why does this matter for free will? I think it matters for free will for a specific reason, because when we realize that the true state of nothingness is beyond just the aspect of space, or our material or immaterial, our vacuum spatial void of the universe is it is something before, in some sense, which is a bad term, but separate from and in the grand scheme of things, or a different entity from true nothingness. Nothingness precluded all of this in some way. Now, how can I prove that? I think it's self-evident. I think that it isn't provable as much as it's apparent. I think that this is what free will is. I think that it's this unmoved movement. It's this prime mover. It's this something rather than nothing. So when you get to that point and you realize that why is there something rather than truly nothing? Why is there space? Why is there time? Why is there substance? Why, like in the sense that we think about it? Why is there material anything? Why is there a finite but in some senses infinite reality? And I think that it is this. It is that there is some uh, unmaterial causal nature that exists, and it's causal, but it's non-causal. It causes all, but it was caused by none. It it When you get to this point, you can really think of it in two different ways, I think. Um, Now, maybe it's the case that, and this is like the more common sense way of thinking about it, that okay, somehow all of this has come into existence, maybe via this free will aspect or the will aspect that I'm trying to outline here, and somehow there has been a very interesting machine built such that we there's something about our minds, about human minds, maybe even about some animal minds, that allows us to tap into this non-causal causal aspect of reality and allows us to really truly have an aspect of free will, and that there is no predetermined path, and that we are influencing and creating the future right now. Maybe that's the case. I think that's a good case. I'd like that case. That sounds good. Or there's my preferred way of thinking about this. So we have this concept, or this a lot of people believe in, who believe in God, believe in like God having a plan for them or a path, or even if you don't believe in God necessarily, there are spiritual people who believe in fate or destiny, or that there is a way, or that the universe has some rhyme or reason or plan for them, and it's tempting, to think that. And I understand like the retort that, oh, well, all that fate, the belief in fate and destiny and all this stuff is it's just a coping mechanism, a way, for human beings to make sense of horrible, things, or feel some security in their lives, when good things happen, that more good things will happen, or when bad things happen, that it's for a reason, and that it's all part of a big plan, that we just as human beings can't understand. It's reassuring, it feels good, to think that that's the case. Even though it seems like there's no real, physical or rational reason to believe it. Or is there? I mean, yeah, it seems reasonable or logical to think that determinism is true. But so maybe fate is real, but is fate worth anything if it has no like goodness to it, if there's no point, if there's no like reason for the things that happen to us, if there is no real plan, if it is just a bunch of, everything's determined, we have a fate, but there's nothing we can do about it, and it might be horrible and nothing actually means anything. Yeah, so that's worrisome, like if that's the version of fate, then that's not one that's really worth, at least aggrandizing and thinking is nice or worth having. That's almost hellish, but so let's try to reframe this. So we can think about fate in a number of ways. We can think about it as being a good plan that's set out for us, and that things happen for a reason, and that it's all part of a big plan. Someone or some consciousness has a better idea of what's good for us, or what would be an interesting experience for us to have than we do, and even bad things are happen to us for a reason. Or that, fate exists, but only because we're in one multiverse and, everything is deterministic and there's no rhyme or reason to it. It just is going to happen and we have no control over it and everything is just happening to us. Or there is no fate and there is no destiny and everything is just random probability, like in quantum mechanics. There's no general consensus, but if we just think of these different scenarios, these different possible ways that it could be, and these different intuitions that we have, the intuition of free will, the intuition of fate, the intuition of plan or destiny. You might not have any, you might not want to give intuition any credence. You might not want to think that intuition is worth anything. But we have senses. Our senses are worth something. And here's one thing that I don't really respect and understand. people want to, there's a big drive in science right now, and materialism in general, like the belief that everything is, is like explainable in material terms. um, that any type of spiritual or mystical experience, religious experience, is explainable in material terms. That it's neurochemistry in your brain, bro. It has nothing to do with anything, otherworldly or anything like that. And my retort to that is just like what do you want? Like what version? Like how would a mystical experience really look other than the way that it does? I mean, like you want to explain away the experience through material terms, but in the process you completely degrade the aspect of the experience. And like all that all of this is really our experience of it. I question, like, what would it really look like? What would a true religious or mystical experience look like for someone? And if we were in a situation where we had true free will and there were no rules and there was no causal reality, where it wasn't just neurochemistry in our brain, whatever that means, then I mean it would just be we'd be angels. Like that's how the philosophers talk about it. That we would be we would have unlimited will. We would have unlimited freedom. But none of those mystical spiritual experiences would mean anything, because we would have we would have complete knowledge. The only reason that something's mystical or spiritual is because it's something more than our, like, it gives us a glance at something that's more than just our finite selves. I think that's at least an aspect of what it is. And I think that really what's going on here is we kind of set the stage, like, and whether it's a combination of, that the future isn't determined and we just set an interesting initial stage, or that we set an interesting initial stage and knew how the song was going to play out from start to finish, or we just had an idea of how it was going to sound. I don't know. I'm not sure. I want to ask you. I think that it's a lot more interesting if you start to think about, fate, destiny, these different things as not just being material aspects, and frankly, just all of reality is not being material. Because, I mean, the only reason why material things are real to us as material beings is because we're relating to them as that, because we're relating to them as material. I mean, anything separate from us would see it as immaterial or something else or something unexplainable. It's all relative, and space is nothing compared to our material selves from our perspective, but from the perspective of true nothingness, it's something very substantial. So anyway, that's my thoughts. I'm very curious what anyone else would think about any of this. I'm stuck, I mean, I'm happy with the way that I think about this right now, but I want to get this concept out there, and I'm curious what people have to say about it. I mean, if this is helpful for you, if like this is a better way for you to think about it than some of the ways that I've outlined, then great. That's all I want to say. So like, comment, subscribe, and thanks for listening. Bye.